It started a juggernaut of a film series that would go on to define an era. A film to begin a domino shift into the largest and tallest of mountains with the greatest and highest of expectations, and fell oh so utterly, depending upon who you ask. This is Iron Man, and I thought to myself, why not discuss the films of the MCU in no exact particular order, going through how I feel, how I rank them, how I... It's Iron Man. It's the 2000s beginning of a superhero franchise, starting with an obscure superhero that, prior to his introduction into the MCU, not many people really knew about him, and most of them would be this. And surprisingly, well, not surprisingly at all, really, this was made by Paramount Pictures. Paramount, wow. So, Marvel was purchased by Disney. Disney bought Marvel. That's what they did. Disney purchased Marvel's rights in the year 2009. So, prior to 2009, Marvel was being released through Paramount, to my knowledge. Marvel was in some sort of a decline throughout the 2000s. They were selling off their rights left and right in order to stay afloat. They sold Spider-Man to Sony, Hulk to Universal, the X-Men, Blade, Punisher, and all sorts of many other things to Fox, such as the Fantastic Four as well. So, all of the big names were no longer under Marvel's hat, but they still wanted to produce films. So they had to look into their obscure vault of the not as well selling, not as large heroes. And they go like, oh, we still have one thing that we could use, the Avengers. It's bring out Iron Man. Marvel did not have the backing of a juggernaut during the early 2000s, at least not Marvel Entertainment as we would know it, as, like DC. DC has always had Warner Brothers as their parent holder and fountain of budgets and money, that they were able to create plenty of TV shows throughout the 2000s and the 90s. Plenty. There was the Batman, the animated series, which launched a juggernaut of shows that should eventually come to Superman, the animated series, to the Justice League, the animated series, to Static Shock, to, what else is there? Batman Beyond, and all of the plethora of DCAU movies. There's the Justice League Unlimited series. And that's where I stopped paying attention to the TV series on there, but Warner's would continue to create plenty more. There's The Batman. I didn't watch that one, but there's The Batman. What else? I can't really think of too many others right now, but there's plenty of them. There's so many DC shows. Warner Brothers Animation has a history spanning over almost 100 years now. They made the Looney Tunes, they made Animaniacs, Freakazoid, Pinky and the Brain, Tiny Toons. They've done so much. Their animation team is the most skilled and one of the most respected in the industry, rivaled only by Disney. Disney would probably be arguably superior, but Warner Brothers at least is consistent. So we have Iron Man, Marvel's attempt at trying to bring the Marvel films into the big screen from their own company's perspective. Spider-Man already launched into the big screen with Sam Raimi's trilogy, but then the third one kind of fell off, and then they haven't made another one since. And then they tried to make the Amazing Spider-Man in the 2010s, but hey, we're not there yet. This is the 2000s still. This is the tail end of the 2000s. This is when superhero movies was kind of in a quiet phase. Spider-Man was not having... Spider-Man 3 had just come out, and it didn't do so well. The Fantastic Four had just done the sale of the Silver Surfer or whatever, and that didn't do so well. X-Men just released The Last Stand, and that didn't go so well with people either. So, Blade Trinity, that didn't go so well. It's like all of Marvel's attempts in the late 2000s would all just fall apart. They ruled the early 2000s, and DC had nothing that they could use to compete on the big screen, but they ruled the animation department. The only thing that Marvel had in the animation department was the Spider-Man show and the X-Men show that they released in the 90s or 80s or whatever. And to add insult to injury, Warner Brothers was the one who animated X-Men Evolution in the early 2000s. So Marvel was kind of in trouble. So they released Iron Man in the late 2000s to launch one of the greatest and most profitable, if not the most profitable, and the largest cinematic universes ever conceived. And it all started here with Iron Man. Well, there have been plenty of Marvel shows prior to this, like Blade, The Punisher, it's the X-Men, and the Fantastic Four, as I've mentioned. These were not from Marvel itself. These were from their IPs that they sold to other film studios, and they made those movies. But this came from Marvel directly. Marvel Entertainment. They were the ones who finally released Iron Man. And did it work? Yes. Iron Man was so well received that it received a sequel almost immediately. We'll talk about that one probably in the future, but we're going to be talking about this one now. It stars Robert Downey Jr., Terrence Howard, Jeff Bridges, and Gwyneth Goop. I just keep on doing that. It keeps lifting upwards, and I don't like that. Let me fix the... There you go. I think that fixed it. Yes, perfect. Sorry about that. So you can see this little white line. The cover was sticking out over the protective plastic casing, and I had to fix that. A little bit of a pet peeve of mine. Anyway, we look in the back, and we see nice and pretty colors. Marvel is the largest icon here, distributed through Paramount Pictures. There's no Disney in sight yet. I don't think Disney's even on Iron Man 2. I don't think Disney would really show up until maybe Thor. Maybe Thor. By the time of Thor, Disney would have purchased the Marvel rights. And maybe it was Disney's idea to create the Marvel Cinematic Universe, whereas this was just probably intended to just be about Iron Man. He was probably just going to be the Iron Man show, Iron Man 2, 3, 4, 5, but no, they actually launched a behemoth of shows after this. But first, Iron Man had to succeed. Robert Downey Jr. was a big bankable star, but he wasn't the most bankable star at the time. But Jeff Bridges, he had a history. He was in plenty of well-respected films, and Terrence Howard has been in many a geezer teaser. And then there's Gwyneth Paltrow, who's Gwyneth Paltrow. This was before she got into Goop. At least to my knowledge, it was. What year exactly was this case released? In 2008, which means that they were filming it probably throughout 2006 and 2007. So this was definitely a 2000s movie set during the age of many a Marvel movie coming out. And while a lot of the 2000s Marvel movies, such as X-Men The Last Stand, Spider-Man 3, Elektra, Blade Trinity, Ghost Rider 2 was 2010s, I guess. I think Ghost Rider 2 is 2010s. But Ghost Rider 1 wasn't the best well-received movie, though we like it because of Nicolas Cage. But there was Ghost Rider, there was plenty of stinkers out there from the Marvel, but Marvel was still crapping out so many movies, man. They were making so many of these guys. And it's like, we need to grab the reins here. We need to make our movie here, and this is it. Robert Downey Jr. immediately captures the audience with his performance and charisma. You can watch this movie 100 times. I have, and I'm absolutely sick of watching it because I can remember everything about it despite not really caring to talk about every single scene. But even I could say, after having been burnt out on watching this film so many times, because knowing me, every time I picked up a new copy of the MCU, I would just go back to this first one, watch it, and go all the way to the newest one. That's how I used to be, man. That's how I used to do this, and I got sick of watching Iron Man so many friggin' times. I was sick of Iron Man 2 as well. And it's like, I had to stop doing that. I would just watch the newest movie from then on. I would not watch all this other crap. Iron Man has the best hero, the most charismatic character that carried the MCU franchise in Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man. Robert Downey Jr. played Tony Stark different than how all the other people have played Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne is considered a playboy. Bruce Wayne is considered a man who believed in justice and wanted to, save Gotham City from itself, and he believed in all that vigilante stuff. Iron Man was immediately different from Bruce Wayne in almost every way, because while Bruce Wayne is Batman's mask, Tony Stark is just Tony Stark. Even in the Iron Man suit, he's Tony Stark through and through. He lets the world know he's Iron Man. He's got one of the biggest egos on the planet, and he's got the IQ to back it up. This man told the army who he was. He said, I'm Iron Man. I'm me, and I'll do whatever the hell I want. And he, in the sequel, doggedly trolled the courts when they go like, and Stark was like, oh, I didn't do that. Oh, I didn't do that at all. And so, we started something that was crazily good. Now, going back and watching this again, I will admit I'm sick of it. I am sick of it. I can watch it, but even I can say, even though I'm sick of it, I can't say it's a bad movie. From the MCU's perspective, from all of the later films like The Eternals, or Spider-Man Far From Home, or Homecoming, or Thor The Dark World, or Thor Love and Thunder. There's a lot of the more recent films like Black Widow and Captain Marvel, and basically the post-Avengers Ultron era. They were starting to make more meh-er and meh-er films. They brought it back with Guardians 2. James Gunn was making some amazing comic book movies, man. He was thinking comic book storytelling first over any other type of thing that the studio may have wanted to tell. James Gunn was like, no, screw that. I'm gonna make a movie first. That's why Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and 2 ended up bringing it all back. They brought everybody back, and Taika Waititi was like, okay, I'm gonna bring Thor back, and we're gonna do Ragnarok. He's gonna do Ragnarok, and it did really good. It did really fun. It revitalized the post Ultron era, revitalized the MCU, but it didn't do it for long, because they would make a good movie, then they would have a stinker. They would make a good movie, they would have a couple stinkers, then they would make a good movie again. It's like, where's the consistency? Did that consistency exist in the first half of the MCU? No, I would say no, not really. This film launched it, and while it's a solid entry, its sequel is just more of the first movie to me. That's why I feel like this film is, in its own way, superior, because Iron Man 2 just came out immediately after Iron Man 1, and it kind of just feels like two halves of the same movie at that point. Blade 2 felt notedly different from Blade 1, whereas Iron Man 2 felt exactly like Iron Man 1, if that makes sense to you. And I would argue that Thor 1, while I love the character of Thor, and he's probably one of my favorites in the MCU, he had nothing on Iron Man. Thor had nothing on Iron Man. There were way too many Dutch angles, and the way it was shot, I would argue that it just didn't work as well. They didn't really sell it as well. They definitely sold Loki, though. Loki was amazing. He was one of the best Marvel villains, and of course they brought him back for Avengers because they didn't really have anybody else to use. That would be like, this is the big one. We need something really good, something that's a surefire hit, and it would be Loki. But despite how I would say that some films in the MCU's first half are kind of meh, they at least tried to make the comic book movie. They tried to make a comic book movie before they made any other type of thought or idea. Like, what's the best way of trying to say it? They tried to tell a message before they were trying to tell a comic book movie, if that makes sense. If they wanna say something instead of just releasing a comic book movie. These were movies. The later films feel like products, if that makes sense. We're going to talk about as many of them as I feel like talking about it, in whatever friggin' order I feel like talking about them. We may talk about other films during the retrospective of this one. I may go off topic. It doesn't matter. This little retrospective series is just about the MCU as a whole, and I'm just going to show you a different film each time. The main character villain of the Iron Man movie first one was Jeff Bridges. I don't know his name. Obadiah. There it is. He was in another bigger Iron Man suit. He was like, my suit's bigger, blah, 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 blah. I want to take over your company, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, you know this story. You've seen it before. You've watched Batman Begins. And there's that big guy, the CEO company of Wayne Corporation. He's like, Bruce Wayne, you've not been here for a while. We're going to take a bit. And Bruce Wayne's like, no, I'm not talking about it. Don't do that. And it's like, that's just how it be with the type of CEO company thing. I don't think they did that the best that they could have done. But at least the captivity sequence with Tony Stark in captivity in an undisclosed Middle Eastern location. Some terrorists kidnapped him. This was post 9/11 era. It was the mid 2000s. That's just what they did. It was still pretty fresh on the mind. That's why they did that. So he's in the Middle East. He's in captivity, and he sees that these terrorists are using his company's weapons. And so prior to this, he was fine with selling weapons to the whole world of weapons manufacturing, winning wars. He thought he was winning wars, selling his weapons to the good guys. But no, his weapons were also being sold to the bad guys. And he's like, I gotta put a stop to this. I cannot let this continue any longer. So when he gets out of there, he immediately goes into his company place, and while the company place I feel like could have been done better, it wasn't really done the best in Wayne Corporation with the Batman movies either. But at least they try here to say, like, Robert Downey Jr. comes in and says, hey, I'm CEO of Stark Tech, man. He looks at Opie and he's like, hey, man, I'm the big guy. I'm the big boss figurehead. And I'm like, we need to shut down weapons manufacturing. We're not going to do weapons manufacturing anymore. And Obadiah is like, oh, weapons manufacturing is how I almost got you killed. Blah, 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 blah. And that he becomes the bad guy. And then he has to beat the bad guy. Opie is meh as a villain. But Jeff Bridges sells the role. He sells it. He's charismatic in his own right. And I would argue that I like Terrence Howard as Rhodey. I don't know why he didn't come back. I might look that up for the sequel. But this is a solid Rhodey. And it sold the friendship a little bit more than... I don't remember the other guy's name. But you see, I remember his name because I could see it right here, Terrence Howard. I can't remember the other guy's name because I'm not looking at it. But Rhodey with Terrence Howard is fine. He's perfectly serviceable, he's comedic, he's funny, yet he also feels like he's a guy in the military, whereas the other guy doesn't really feel like a guy in the military, in my opinion. What else can I talk about? Who else can I talk about? Gwyneth Paltrow is fantastic in this role. While I might not have the same sympathies for the actress off camera, on camera, she is fantastic as Pepper Potts. When you think of Pepper Potts anymore, you don't really think of, like, any cartoon show variant of of Pepper Potts. You think of Gwyneth Paltrow, man. And I would argue that she really did sell the role best. She is Gwyneth Paltrow. She is Pepper Potts. She is Gwyneth Paltrow. But she is Pepper Potts, The names are synonymous with each other at this point. When you think of Pepper Potts in a movie, you're going to be thinking of Gwyneth Paltrow's performance as Pepper Potts, And that's the same thing with Tony Stark, with Robert Downey Jr. The names are synonymous with each other at this point. You can think of somebody else being Sherlock Holmes, for example. You can think of anybody else being Dr. Dolittle, for example. But you cannot think of anybody else being Tony Stark other than Robert Downey Jr. He just looks like Tony Stark. He sells the role. He made it his own, man. And I would argue that the casting choices for these characters, at least for the heroes, where they're concerned, while the story in these opening movies of this one, Captain America, The First Avenger, Thor 1, while I would argue that the plots of these opening movies may not have been the strongest, they may not have been the best movies they could have been, they introduced the best actors who could have possibly played those roles. The casting choices for the heroes and for many of the supporting cast were brilliantly picked. They were brilliantly picked. This guy looks like Tony Stark. Robert Downey looks like Tony Stark. Pepper Potts, Gwyneth Paltrow looks like Pepper Potts. They look like the roles. You look at the comic books, you look at the designs of the characters, and you go like, at least in this first half of the show, they wanted to pick people who looked like these guys, who looked like these actors, these characters. And I was like, thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing that. I love it when you pick people who look like the characters instead of just changing and all that stuff just to suit what your own casting choice is. You pick the people who look like they would best fit the role, and that's how they made Tony Stark work. They picked the person who looked like they best fit the role, who acted like they best fit the role. That's why these earlier movies worked so well for the audiences. It's because they picked the best person for the role rather than adapting the character to fit the casting choice that they had already chosen. Instead of doing that, you modify the actor to suit the character instead. That's how I always believe movies, TV shows, anything needs to be adapted. All of that stuff needs to be casting choices and all that stuff. Well, I'm no casting director and all that stuff. I at least feel like In my opinion, you do not modify the character to suit the actor that you want to play the character. You keep the character as intact as possible, and you modify which actor you choose to fit into that character. It's not the actor modify the character to fit into the actor, it's modify the actor to fit into the character. That's what the actor is to do. They are to play the role. You are not meant to change the character to fit the actor. I could go off on a rant about that, but I'm trying not to. Overall, there's not really much I could talk about. This is 25 minutes. Even though I'm saying there's not much I could really talk about, I've been going off topic so much. I can't exactly talk about this movie other than what it did to the franchise, what it started, what it began. As a movie itself, it's not the best. In fact, I would rank it in the bottom half of the MCU franchise films. But at least it started something. This thing started something incredible. You could say it's for better or for worse what these films became in the future, but it started the most marketable, the most profitable series of films on the planet. And that's saying something.